About 6 months ago, my iPhone 15 had a small technical problem which couldn't unfortunately be fixed. So I switched to the Google Pixel 9a, which I'm fully aware is a bit of a left field choice coming from a fairly new iPhone. So was it worth it? There were a few minor niggles initially. Firstly, signing into all my accounts was not as easy as you'd think. Now, Apple likes to push sign in with Apple, so meaning that essentially if you sign in with Apple on your iPhone and you switch to an Android, you basically either have to hope that they have that option on the website, or if it's an app, you have to essentially make a new account, which for me wasn't a lot of a problem because things that I did sign in with Apple on that were major, like was able to go on my computer, sign in, and then change the email. But a lot of the time I did have to sign in with Google. If I signed in with Google previously, obviously it was very, very easy, or if it was my email, it was remembering the password, because whilst Google does transfer over passwords, it doesn't transfer over every single one because it's linked to the Google account, and anything that's in your iCloud password, I had to go on my computer and sort of view those separately, and if they were wrong, then I just had to create a new account, unfortunately, which already did put a bit of a bump and not exactly set off a good first impression, but I do think that's more on Apple's end than Google's end. Another thing people don't think about when they do a new phone is backing up absolutely everything. Now, I created my Google account before I turned my iPhone 15 off, purely because I knew I needed to transfer my photos to Google Photos, my WhatsApp needed to be uploaded to Google Drive, and all of my other sort of stuff, like my files and stuff, I transferred over to Google Drive as well. So I paid for a Google Drive plan, which was 100 gigabytes, and I think it's $12.99 a year. So that was again something that I had to do, but it was quite a long time as well, because if you think, I had thousands of photos and videos, so it took quite a while to back all those up. But again, that is more on Apple's end, because basically every other phone manufacturer uses Google Photos. So Apple's sort of locking you into Apple Photos was more of the problem here than sort of the backing up. Additionally as well, the software did take some getting used to. It's definitely got similarities to Apple in that sort of a lot of the gestures are the same, but the layout of all the menus and sort of the swipe from the top and sort of how you access your apps is quite different. Now, it's important to note I did used to have a Samsung Galaxy A10 before I had an iPhone 6, then an XR, and then 15. So I was roughly sort of well-versed with Android because my grandparents have Android as well. But it was definitely different to get used to it as your main phone and not just your grandparents' phone that you're tinkering on for a little bit to fix a problem. But after a couple of days, I did generally get used to things. But again, it's another roadmap that you've got to get used to. Like, you've got to know that it is not going to be the same and that it's going to take some getting used to. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's different. Continuing on with the software, it really is, you don't anticipate how much you use Apple services until you don't use them anymore. So a big one is iCloud Mail. So I use my iCloud email address for absolutely everything. And so I was part of the family plan, but obviously I left that family plan because I no longer needed it for iCloud Plus. So a lot of my emails weren't actually going through to my iCloud account. So I had to essentially either message the people that were emailing me and say, hi, this is my new email, or I had to essentially go in and forward them on, which was not good. Additionally, also music. You can get Apple Music on Android devices, but it's nowhere near as optimized, and it's really quite bad. It's definitely a half effort from Apple there. As well, another thing is the Health app. I actually prefer the Google Health app, but again, it's that getting used to it. When you've used Apple Health for years, it's very difficult to go and take Google Health and immediately just be like, yeah, I like this. My first impression was I hate this, and now I'm 6 months in and I absolutely love it. So main thing to take away is that there is always going to be some minor niggles. It's just really how you approach them is the main thing. However, it's not all bad. There were some things that I did actually like. Now, one of the main things I did actually like was actually the software. Once I got used to it, I loved it. The customization, the level of personalization that you can do to the software is unreal. You can change the color schemes. You can make it so they match your wallpaper. You can, obviously, any wallpaper that you upload from your photos, it matches that as well. All your buttons, all your menus, everything is color matched as well. Obviously, you can customize from swipe or button navigation. Now, I use swipe navigation because that is the one thing I could not get used to. Button navigation just feels so slow and awful. But I will say that the software and how everything is laid out is quite intuitive. Like the mail apps and a camera app and the settings and everything, it's quite logically laid out. in the fact that there's like, I found Apple sometimes, if you wanted to manage your iCloud settings or your storage, it was a bit more difficult. Whereas Google, there is literally a button called storage and you click that. Whereas with Apple, you had to go onto general and then storage, and then you sort of had to look at that. Don't get me wrong, there are some things that are more buried, like Google's screen time controls are a little bit more buried. So on Apple, there was just a screen time button, whereas on Google, you have to go on, I believe it's parent and sort of well-being, and then you go on screen time from there. But yeah, for the most part, Google's settings are more logically laid out, and I did fall in love with the customization of the software. Another big bonus is I used to have a MacBook, and that looked really well with my iPhone, but I did get rid of it because for my degree, it made more sense to have a Windows computer. I use a lot of spreadsheets, so it made more sense to use Excel and things like that. Now, linking to my computer from my iPhone was never bad. I had the Link to Windows app. I could send files over fairly easily, but it was never really like as good as like AirDrop, which I had on my Mac when I had that. Now, Google has Quick Share, which is, I would say, actually better than Link to Windows because you can download the Quick Share app on your computer and you can send files to and from. Now, Link to Windows is not a bad app, but it's definitely not a good one. Like it's not very easy to use. Whereas Quick Share is literally, I hit Quick Share on my phone, like AirDrop, comes up with list, tap, sent, and I would say linking as well with all the accounts. It's easier to sign into Google than it is to sign into Apple, especially on a Windows computer, because it will then take you to the Apple website where it will get you to verify and then it'll text you a code and it's just a whole thing. Whereas with Google, it just does it because it remembers you, especially if you use Chrome. If you use Chrome, you'll notice that link a lot more. It's honestly, if you've signed in something on your phone, you're in on your computer. It's that easy. Now, I'm moving into my flat on the 12th of September, so I'm definitely thinking about getting a smart home, getting a couple of smart bulbs, smart plugs, and that kind of thing, so that just to make my life a little bit easier when I come back from lectures. And Apple Home, I never really took advantage of it because you only works with very certain sort of devices. Google Home is actually more compatible with a lot of things. So I actually got a Google Home smart bulb, which I had previously worked with my Amazon Echo over there. I'm not going to say her name because she'll spawn in, but it works. It links really well with the Google Home app, and I really do think that the integration is top tier compared to Apple. And the app is very easy to use, and again, it's color mapped to the software. So I also bought a smart plug from IKEA, and again, seamlessly linked. If you get a Google TV streamer, you can link them all together so that you can do them it will do multiple things, like one thing triggers another. And the Google TV streamer actually came free with my phone as a deal. So it was honestly the simplest integration I've had so far. Much better than the Echo app. Much better. Now, one thing I didn't expect to like actually was the calendar. Now, the calendar on Google, I always had a Google Calendar link before because I had a Gmail account. So I basically just kind of made it so that anything on my Apple would go on my Google. However, you couldn't make it so that anything on your Google would go on your Apple. Now, Google Calendar links so much better with literally anything. My tablet, my laptop, it genuinely, if it works on your tablet and your phone, it works on your laptop. I have the Google Calendar app installed and it's a lot easier to use. It's a lot more fun. There's more colors. It's generally just a nicer calendar to use. You don't feel like you're corporate. You feel like you've got energy and you know where everything is. Whereas Apple Calendar just sometimes feels a bit plain. Again, it's a calendar app. It's not supposed to be fun, but I do think that little bit of flair and colour is definitely where Google is going to start winning over people. Now, whenever anyone talks about Pixel phones, the cameras always get mentioned. Now, I can confirm that the photo quality is worth the hype. The photo quality on this Pixel is on par, if not better, than my iPhone 15, and that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, sensor size. It's a 50 megapixel sensor, or 48, I can't remember, which is the same as the iPhone, but the aperture is a lot wider. Now, means it can let more light in, more detail. We love that. The processing on this camera is miles above Apple. The image processing, even things like the dynamic range and the color accuracy is phenomenal on Google Pixel. So as well as the detail as well. So the iPhone 15 actually doesn't have a macro mode because it doesn't have that zoom camera. So when you get close to something on the iPhone, it wouldn't come up with the macro mode. It would just take a normal picture. The Google will automatically come up with like a picture of a little plant in the corner and it will trigger macro mode, which just means the detail you can get on some of these shots is incredible. Like, the level of detail on photos, unmatched. I honestly, this is the base Pixel, so I can't even begin to imagine the Pixel 11 Pro, like what that camera's like. Now, the video, unfortunately, is where we see our first downgrade. Now, video quality on iPhone is always really, really good. You know, I'm a content creator. I have obviously experience with video cameras, and the iPhone 15 is better than the Pixel, but it's not as worse as you think it is. So if you have good lighting and a somewhat decent knack for a little bit of color editing and stuff like that, you can get it to the same as the iPhone. And I will actually say that, considering sort of everything you're getting as well, I would say that the video is not enough of a letdown to justify not getting it. Obviously, I bought it and I knew that when I got it. So I would say you just have to be strategic about where you put it, as opposed to the iPhone where you can just point and shoot. The Google, you have to be a bit more strategic when you film. So for example, I'm in front of a window, and if you're in sort of just a dark room, you'll notice low light video isn't as good as the iPhone. But I don't think that should take away from the fact that the overall photo quality is really, really good. Now, when you think of Pixel, you probably also think of the AI features. Now, the AI features in the camera app are miles above Apple. So the iPhone 15 is actually the last iPhone to not get Apple Intelligence. So you do feel that letdown when you see sort of any other phone. You do basic things with Apple Intelligence, but because Google uses the Gemini model, it's phenomenal. Genuinely is phenomenal. Now, you can do Add Me, which is essentially where you say if there's only two of you, one takes the photo, then you swap, and it basically adds the other person in to make it look like you're both there. And if Apple did that, I'm not gonna lie, it probably would look very good. Whereas this looks like you are both in the photo. So honestly, I would say Add Me, top tier. The AI enhancing is actually not as strong as you think it would be. So I know AI enhancing can sometimes be a bit like, it makes you look completely different to how you are. Now, this, I would say they've gone for a more conservative approach. Now, I don't know if this is because of the phone or just generally because of how Google is, but that's worked. That's worked. It just makes things seem a little bit clearer. It does only work for photos as of currently. I do believe, or if it works for videos, it's not very good. It doesn't really do a lot, but I would say it's not bad. Definitely not bad at all. Now, the AI features in general on this phone are phenomenal. So let's get into those. The integration is the biggest thing with Gemini. So the integration between Google Calendar and Gmail and Google Docs and all that jazz is the main reason why I prefer Gemini. Now, I've started using Google Docs now on my computer because I found it to be a lot easier to sync with my phone and my tablet. And it's basically Word, and it's free. I get it free through uni anyway, but I can use it personally for free. As well, the integration with that is incredible, but also just the way Gemini links to Windows in general is pretty good. So you can get the Gemini app on Windows, and I use it instead of Copilot because whilst I bought a Copilot Plus PC, Gemini is smarter. Now, Copilot can still obviously has its benefits, interacts with the computer itself, and you can use it in Word, but it's not enough of an integration that I would say you're going to miss anything. I would say, if anything, you're going to prefer Gemini for that integration, especially if you use like Gmail, Google Calendar, all that stuff. As well, also, the free image upload is a game changer for me. So ChatGPT, if you may know, does limit the amount of image uploads you can have. Apple Intelligence, never had it. Probably, I don't know. But because this is completely free, I can upload as many images as I want to Gemini, and it will just keep taking them. Next one. And that freedom to just not worry about, I've only got 5 today, is honestly more of a benefit than you might think. The other thing as well is that the responses are very, very fast. Considering this is actually the slowest phone that Google makes, I would say that the responses don't feel like a budget phone level of response. And it actually uses previous conversations to gather information and say, okay, you've mentioned this before, let's link it back to this because they're a related topic. And so you get a more thoughtful answer that actually gives you sort of the advice you're looking for. Now, hardware is definitely where you may feel a step down. Now, the sides are aluminium, so they still have that fairly premium feel. It doesn't feel like a completely cheap phone, something like a Samsung Galaxy A06 or something like that. Like it has that weighty feel. The back is plastic, but they've done it in a really clever way to make sure that it doesn't feel like cheap plastic. It just feels like normal plastic. So, well, slightly higher quality plastic. So you can definitely still tell it is plastic, but it's not as much of a hindrance as you think. But it's nowhere near as good as the matte frosted glass on the back of the iPhone 15. But if you're going to use a case anyway, I would say you won't notice the difference. The only difference you'll notice will be in the weight. Now, the weight, it's slightly different in the hand. The iPhone definitely feels a bit chunkier. Not chunkier, heavier, but more of a premium heavy. But again, it's not enough of a difference to justify. However, the glass on the front of the Pixel 9a is really where you start to see where they've cut their corners, because this is Gorilla Glass 3. Now, essentially what that means is scratch resistance isn't going to be great compared to the latest phones, especially not compared to Apple's Ceramic Shield, and drop protection is again the same. It's going to be nowhere near as good as Apple's Ceramic Shield. So I would definitely recommend a screen protector if you can get one. They're so cheap on Amazon, just save yourself the stress. But again, we'll come on to the stress later, because that is an interesting part I don't think many people look at. But yeah, drop protection, scratch protection on the front. It's quite old tech, Gorilla Glass 3. They're on Gorilla Glass Victus 2, I think, now. So again, we are like so many generations ahead now that it's definitely starting to feel a bit outdated. Now, onto the screen. Now, the screen is 120 hertz, which you will notice immediately as you pick up the phone. It is, compared to Apple feels slow and basic in comparison. It was one of the first settings I turned on. I turned on 120 hertz, and it feels so snappy, so smooth, and you really notice it as well. I think it's one of the things, you don't notice it until you've used a 120 hertz, because at Apple, you're like, oh, Apple's dead smooth, the animations are nice, but honestly, 120 hertz, phenomenal. Turn it on right now. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of Apple's phones have this now. Even the base 17 has this now. But if you're coming from like a 15, 14, even a 13, like you're going to notice, even a 16, you're going to notice that this feels a lot snappier. And I think that also pairs into the chip. And onto the processor, you will notice that it is a little bit slow. Now, it's not impossibly slow. Like it's 90, probably 85% of the iPhone. But for like, if you push it really hard during gaming, you will notice that it's got a slight bit of warmth to it, and it might slow down a little bit. But apart from that, I would say that the performance on this phone is exceptional for the price. Speaking of the price, for this price, you get 7 years of software updates, which, when you think about it, is about how long Apple did the iPhone XR. Because I remember I had one of those, and it just kept going and going and going, and I was like, okay. But no, 7 years will get you Android 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, I do believe. Unless it's... No, it should get you up to Android 22. At which point, so nobody's keeping this phone for 7 years. So just be reassured, if you buy this used, you've got a few years left. Now, speaking of price, I paid £349, and not including the trade-in. That was just straight up cash price. And I do think this is phenomenal value for money, considering the camera hardware, the software, and the overall performance of the device. I genuinely do think that this is a good deal, considering you get the Pixel 10a for $449, and it is essentially the same phone with the same processor, just a couple more AI features. But honestly, chuck that in the bin, get the 9a. The value for money is insane. Another thing on the price side is that because your phone is $349 and not $699 like Apple's, you don't have that stress of, oh my God, I've dropped my phone, I can't afford this. $349, yes, it's still a lot of money, but it's nowhere near as much as paying Apple to fix it or replace it. So you definitely get that lack of stress of like, okay, you know what, if my phone dies in 4 years, it's fine, I paid 350 quid for it. Rather than thinking, oh crap, I've had this phone for 3 years, I paid £1,000 for it, and it's broken. You don't get that stress. So I suppose the main question is, do I regret it? No. Now, I will say that the downgrades are there. Like, they're noticeable, but the upgrades and the software and the change from ecosystems is enough to justify the downgrades. I don't think they're downgrades that anyone will notice and think, oh, this is a horrible phone. Because unless you're doing heavy work, you won't even notice the performance. The video, unless you're constantly filming and you're filming for like 4 hours a day and you need it for like filming 4 YouTube videos a day and you're posting TikToks 4 times a day, like you're not going to notice it. And even then, some decent color rendering and some good lighting will fix all that for you. the price, again, the price just seals the deal for me. Honestly, I own this phone now. I'm not paying on a contract for it. I own this phone, and that feeling of owning your phone and knowing that you're not going to be stuck paying for a phone that if you break it is the best feeling in the world. So no, absolutely do not regret it.